I'm going to put one of these things in my house. Isn't it awesome? All right. So my name is Karl Groves. Our talk is called There's No Such Thing as a Normal User. I'm from a company in the United States called Level Access. We do accessibility. So first things first, I already introduced myself, but I also wanted to give a round of applause to Build Stuff Conference for having accessibility talks. Can we do that? I love seeing mainstream developer conferences talking about accessibility. It's something I'm seeing more and more here, and I was really excited to get the invitation to be here. That was me. So the story about our talk is called "There's No Such Thing as a Normal User," and really, so I want you to raise your hands when you hear the browsers and platforms you support. You support Chrome, yeah. If you don't support Chrome, we got a problem. All right, we support Edge and Firefox and Safari. How about Opera? Vivaldi. How many have you not put your hands up? Do you support refrigerators? You can. Your UX team might have generated personas, right? You guys have heard of personas before. There's lots of talks in this room about UX. So I know we know about personas. And they might have described specific user types. And all you've really done when you've talked about personas is define what your company thinks is normal. And so when you design against those personas, you're designing against what you think is normal. But is that what you really have? So your analytics, if you look at your Google Analytics or whatever analytics program that you use to track users and stuff like that, might be organized like Google Analytics across platform. And the platforms that they'll talk about on Google Analytics would be like 3 major buckets: desktop, mobile phone, and tablet. And so Google is already defining what normal is here. They're starting to define what normal is here because they're defining what the platforms are that the users might be coming from. But depending on what you actually design for, what your audience is or what they're using, they could be displaying your website on an Xbox, or even, like I said, a refrigerator or something like that. So Google's assumption is probably correct for now, but as we get more and more devices, especially with UIs on them, like Kindle, Fire TV, and Xbox, and things like that, the web is getting put on more and more things. And Google Analytics doesn't even show you that, doesn't even let you know what other platforms there could be out there for the users. So now, when we talk about desktop, for instance, we have a couple of major browsers out there. These are the browsers that are accessing my website: Chrome, Edge, Firefox, Safari, Internet Explorer still, Vivaldi, Opera, and even Lynx on my website. I don't know why. Anybody here not know what Lynx is? There's lots of young people in here. Yeah, it's a text-only browser, literally text-only. Doesn't support JavaScript. Supports only basic HTML, like 3.2 form elements and stuff like that. Really weird. So when we get to browser and desktop combinations on Windows, there's 7 browsers supported on Windows. On Mac, major browsers supported on Windows, and 7 on Mac. On Linux, there's 17. I don't know why that's so really high and weird, because they also use their own sort of rendering. Some of them use a different rendering engine. So it's kind of weird. But that's on my personal website. I have 17 different Linux browsers browsing on my website. It's kind of weird. And then Chrome OS, of course, has its own thing. So now when we're talking about normal, we're up to 52 possible combinations of what normal is. If we bring in mobile data, iOS, all the browsers on iOS use WebKit. Android has 4 different rendering engines for the different browsers that are there, which is WebKit, Blink, Gecko, and KHTML. What's interesting about Android is also that there's different possible operating systems across Android, different flavors of it. But there's also different mobile operating systems that could be accessing your site, Symbian, Fire OS, and stuff like that. These are just the ones accessing my site, and now we're at 37 possible combinations. And then there's screen resolution. With screen resolution, we are at 420 combinations. It gets really complicated when we're talking about different screen resolutions. A lot of you probably design for certain different breakpoints. How many breakpoints do you define? Four, four, right? Well, actually, on my website, this is the array of possible different screen resolutions that are supported on my personal website. Something like 17 different mobile sizes. So yeah, we could probably define for 3 or 4 that might cut it, but it's really up to what it looks like on the customer's browser. So at this point, we are at 420 different combinations of normal. Now, what about disabilities? Well, 27% of people in the U.S. have a disability. Worldwide, it's about 25%. The actual numbers and the way they get those numbers is a little on the weird side. It depends on who's doing the counting. Who does the counting is going to impact what they define as disability. So, for instance, if it's a government agency that deals with jobs, then that agency is going to be defining disability as whether or not somebody can have a job or keep a job. When it's with education, and those people are gathering the statistics, it's about whether they can get an education. So the number can vary, but it hovers around 25, 27, 20, somewhere around there. So here's a spoiler. There's going to be thousands of different types of combinations of disability platform, browser, screen resolution. So there's 6 different disability groupings: blindness, low vision, vision impaired, motor impaired, speech impaired, cognitively impaired. That adds up to 5, but I don't know where number 6 went. Sorry. Hearing impaired is what I've missed. That's terrible. So visual impairments. Now, if we get into visual impairments, there's 8 different kinds of combinations of different visual impairments. There's 3 different types of blindnesses and 5 basic buckets around what low vision is defined as. About 5% of people, adults out there, have a visual disability with blindness or difficulty seeing, even when wearing glasses. I know a lot of us have glasses on. That's not counted in that 5%. So because of that, let's bring in screen readers. So desktop and screen reader combinations on Windows, there's 11. Mac OS, there's 2. Chrome OS, 1. Linux, 1. Mobile screen reader combinations. iOS, it has only 1 screen reader, and that's VoiceOver, if you've ever heard of it. And on Android, there's 4 different types of screen readers. Now, if you're an Android user, the default one usually is TalkBack, but different mobile vendors have decided to create their own different kinds of screen reader, and it's kind of weird because they usually suck. Hearing impairments, there's 4-ish type of hearing impairments. Sensory neural hearing loss is a lot of what most people are familiar with when they think about it, but there's 4 different types. Over 6% of people out there are deaf or have serious difficulty hearing. And so at this point, it gets really, really hard to pin down the different types of disabilities and combinations and percentages and all that sort of stuff. About 12% of adults have some sort of motor disability. And these are just some of the major ones out there. Now, there's an organization in the United States called WebAIM. If you've never heard of them and you're interested in accessibility, go to webaim.org, because they have an amazing discussion list. No arguing, no flame wars, none of that sort of stuff. And it's got archives for over 20 years. But they do, they do a number of different surveys. And the most recent one that they did on motor impairments found 9 different specific types of motor impairments among the respondents in that survey. 9 different types. So 22% of the respondents in WebAIM's motor disability survey also reported having multiple disabilities. There are 10 different types of assistive technologies in use by people with motor impairments. About 13 different cognitive impairments, about 13% of adults report having a cognitive disability with serious difficulty concentrating, remembering, or making decisions. So when you add in all the disabilities to our desktops and our resolutions and our browsers and our operating systems and all that sort of stuff, you get 1,221 combinations of normal. I'm sorry, and you add in the resolutions to those things, you get 14,000. So 14,000 different combinations of normal. Now, there's a lot of people who say, well, you hear people saying, well, we don't really have a whole lot of disabled users accessing our website. Have anybody ever heard that? You really don't know, really, based on what I've just talked about. So in the United States, the statistics that I had, 27%, like I said before, have a disability. 12% have a mobility disability. 12.8% of U.S. adults have a cognitive disability. 7.2% of adults have an independent living disability. 6.1 are deaf or hard of hearing. 4.8 are visually impaired. And 30.6 have a self-care disability. So those numbers add up to more than 27%, don't they? Anybody know why? Because people can have multiple different types of disability. So now you're thinking, accessibility. If you're a front-end developer, you're probably thinking, oh my God, I got to deal with all this different stuff with these different browsers and viewports and breakpoints and all this sort of stuff. And I'm like, oh my God, now I can't even begin to think about how complex it is to support accessibility. I want to try to demystify that with the rest of my presentation if possible. Okay, so the thing I'm going to say here is that we need to support universal design. Often people think that if we support accessibility, that's going to make things ugly. And I would argue that a lack of creativity is actually what makes things ugly, and people use accessibility as their excuse for that. So there's a handful of core principles in universal design. That's equitable use, flexibility in use, simple and intuitive use, perceptible information, tolerance for error, low physical effort, size and space for approach and use. And this entryway, this is the entryway to a court building in the United States, espouses every single one of those sorts of things. It's attractive, right? I think so, at least. But if you notice there, they've done an absolutely perfect job of doing universal design. This is obviously a promotional shot with all the people and stuff removed, but I've actually been here. And you see here that there's the ramp on either side of that entryway. There's 2 steps to the entryway. There's a ramp there. That ramp is about 48 inches, about a meter 10, something like that. It goes up no more than a couple of centimeters per about 20 centimeters of travel. Trying to do my conversion in my head because we still use inches for whatever reason. But if you look at it and you see this and you see people actually using it, you'd think, oh, those are the ramps. That's obviously for accessibility, and that's true. But there's also a ton of people who just walk on that thing. You hear a lot about accessibility advocates talking about the curb cut effect. And the curb cut effect is that when you create a curb cut in the curb, where it goes down on maybe the corners and stuff like that, and you hear people say, oh, that's, now not only is it accessible, but there's also, the ability for people who are using strollers to go up and down that thing, or people using trolleys of some kind to go up and down that thing. But what's really, really, really awesome about this thing is it's not even that. When people use it, it's mostly people walking on it. They just walk in, and they don't even think about that sort of thing. That's what's really great about this kind of design. I say it's kind of hidden in plain view. So a couple of other principles, applying these principles in UI design on digital spaces is really kind of simple. We're going to take those same principles that I talked about and talk about some of those in terms of design, and I'm going to talk about those in terms of development. But first one is we're going to talk about giving users control. One of the most common ones that people talk about is infinite scrolling. Infinite scrolling tends to create issues with loss of focus for screen reader users, and it's going to be potentially confusing for people with cognitive and learning disabilities. If we give them the actual control over what gets displayed and when, then that we're giving them back control. Another one that I see a lot of is, how many of you ever seen a form where the button is disabled until the user fills in all the information? Well, that's stripping away control over the user experience of that specific form. If we give them the ability to fail, we're also giving them control, right? We keep that button enabled, let them click the button with insufficient input, and then tell them that they have a problem. Now we're giving them the control. And it's also fault tolerant, which is what I talked about as one of the other things. Offer the user choice. So consider providing different ways for people to complete tasks, especially those that are complex and standard. This is a mobile screenshot of your email. If you notice that you can swipe and you can either, depending on the mail program, it's usually archive and delete. But you also can click the message and then delete it. And so the user has the choice of either not even bothering reading that thing, just deleting it, getting it out of there as soon as they see it, or opening it, reading it, deciding that they don't want to consume that content and then delete it or archive or something like that. So provided that swipe to delete feature is going to be an alternate mechanism to actually go in there and take action on it. Another one of those principles, again, that I talked about, we're going to leverage familiarity. So we're going to use familiar conventions and apply them consistently. Familiar interfaces are going to borrow from well-established patterns. If you read the UX style guides for all platforms that are out there that have one, Windows, iOS, Mac OS, even KDE, and a lot of the Linux platforms, Linux desktops have design style guides, and they all talk about leveraging consistent design, consistent text labeling, consistent page architecture and appearance, all that sort of stuff. And leveraging familiarity in the design means that the user doesn't have to adapt to the way you do things, doesn't have to adapt to the way you think that things should look and operate. They're going to use the convention, and the UX is going to be consistent for them, not only across the platform itself, but also across into your application as well. So that's really good. Another one would be considering the situation. So people make use of your UI in different situations, and make sure your interface delivers a valuable experience regardless of their circumstances. Like, for instance, this screenshot of a video. We've seen a lot of this lately. Lots of people are doing this, which is providing captions on by default. And what's great about that, is if you're like me and you're doom scrolling at night while your partner is sleeping on the other side, you don't have to wake them up to hear the content, right? Okay, provide comparable experience. So ensure the user interface provides a comparable experience for all users so people can accomplish tasks in a way that suits their needs without undermining the quality of content. My other favorite one is adding value. So this specific set of screenshots shows basically what types of things can come about from supporting the other features that are already built into the platform for convenience. For instance, this was a booking this is a booking email. It allows you to also get a map of where the location is. To get there, you can also add the item to your Apple Wallet and things like that, which is really, really cool. But as a developer myself, a lot of that stuff feels kind of squishy. I'm not the world's best UX designer. Like a lot of people, I can probably find more things that are bad in a UI than I can design them myself. I usually rely on people better than that. But myself, as a developer, I also think that in terms of accessibility, we need to understand the platform. I've been doing accessibility consulting for about 20 years now, and I can tell you without ever looking at any of your websites, 5 things that you have wrong on your websites. That's not because you guys are bad, it's because I see them so often, and a lot of it is due to not understanding the actual platform, right? A lot of developer conferences we see a lot of talks that are all based around the latest and greatest new sexy platforms. We have talks about, I don't know, I haven't seen any here, but like Tailwind or whatever the latest thing is, right? But a lot of times what we find is lack of basic understanding of the platform itself that you're building on is a really big problem. This quote comes from Cunningham and Cunningham. Anybody here really big into Agile? Lots of Agile talks here this week. Anybody know who Ward Cunningham is? Any Agile folks? So Ward Cunningham is one of the originators of the extreme programming concept, and a lot of Agile principles come from Ward Cunningham. So I stole this quote: "The result of performing some operation should be obvious, consistent, and predictable." And he's actually talking in this particular blog post about object-oriented programming, but I decided it was about UX instead. But the idea here is that this consistency for the user, this consistency of what they experience, is going to lead to a better experience for them. Has anybody here ever created like a custom dropdown or used a plugin or UI library that has a custom dropdown, custom select element? Yeah. So let's talk about what that does. So this is what I talk about, the principle of least astonishment. One of the most commonly mimicked UI patterns on the web is the select element. And since the early Web 1.0, designers have wanted to style those things, and they've been pretty difficult to style. Nowadays, you can style the default select, but you can't style the option elements that come down when you open the select element. And that's why designers are like, oh my God, we need to create our own custom one because it doesn't look very good. But let's read what this thing does. So the HTML select element represents a control that presents a menu of options. The options within the menu are represented by option elements, which can be grouped by op-group elements. Options can be pre-selected for the user. Tab moves focus into the field. A second tab key selects the current item on the list, updates the field's value, closes the drop-down list, moves focus to the next focusable item in that tab order. Alt and down arrow or space opens the drop-down list and moves focus to the selected option. If nothing is selected, then focus moves to the first option on the list. If the combo box is not editable, then spacebar may be used to open the drop-down list. Up and down moves focus up and down the list. As focus moves inside the drop-down list, the edit field is updated. Enter selects the current item on the list, updates the field value, edit highlights the selected item in the drop-down list, closes the drop-down list, returns focus to the field. The escape key closes the drop-down list, returns focus to the field. It does not change the current selection. Typing a letter or any other printable character key moves focus to the next instance of a visible node whose title begins with that printable letter, and it also exposes these roles to accessibility APIs. Did your custom select element do that? All right. Yeah, they don't. They almost universally, they never do that. A really, really popular one is one called Chosen. It was started off as a jQuery UI plugin, but now it's you can get it, I think, in vanilla JavaScript flavors. But really, really popular. Doesn't do any of that sort of stuff, and so therefore has broken all of that predictability. If you go back and you look at all of the select elements that you've ever interacted with in your life, you know that it does all of those things, right? As you start typing your country name, it's going to autocomplete like that. And so select elements have that built-in autocomplete to them. Autocomplete is actually an accessibility feature that is aimed at decreasing the number of necessary keystrokes for people with mobility impairments. And by the way, the select element, the autocomplete feature, has reduced typing by about 25%. Cumulatively, they estimate that it has saved over 200 years of typing per day. So there you go. This screenshot is actually a screenshot from a presentation on the accessibility object model. So the accessibility object model seeks to sort of do a little bit of what the DOM also does, which is that the document object model represents an abstraction of what the objects on the screen are. It defines what methods and properties are there. And the accessibility model, object model seeks to doing that by also improving improving access to those objects in a way that also transforms it into an accessibility tree that can be consumed by assistive technologies. So it adds additional JavaScript features, basically, JavaScript methods and properties that we can manipulate to improve access to it. But what's really great about this is that it really does describe a lot of the reasons why we should pay attention to gaining a familiarity with the platform itself, which is to say that our HTML, CSS, and JavaScript becomes the DOM and the accessibility object model. And all of the items that get painted to the screen are represented by objects, as you know, with your familiarity with the DOM, in a way that is also therefore interpreted by this thing that all browsers support, which is an accessibility API. The accessibility API informs the user of one core thing, and that is what's called, what I term as, what is this thing and what does it do? Despite all of the massive amounts of accessibility guidelines and standards and all that sort of complicated crap that's out there, there's really only one thing that the user is going to be concerned with when it comes to your design and your development, is what is this thing and what does it do? So when you encounter a user interface on the web, your brain automatically creates this cognitive model of what's on the screen, right? And we know, based on our repeat familiarity with the web and with computers, I see a lot of computers out, we know what something is. If I have on a form on my website a really small circle with some text next to it, well, from your perspective, with some text next to it, hopefully, what is that? It's a radio button, right? We know that because we've seen them. We've used them before. With a radio button, what can I do with it? I can select one, and only one, right? And once one of them is selected, I have to have one of those selected. You can't deselect all of those things. If I change the visual design of that thing to a square, what am I going to expect? Checkbox. And I can select one, none, some, or all, right? I can completely deselect all of them as well. And so that's how checkboxes operate. And our brain automatically answers for us as soon as we experience it, what is this thing and what does it do? So there's a lot of the things that we need to discuss around the various nuances around accessibility and all that sort of stuff. But think to yourself specifically, what is this thing? What does it do? I am incredibly fast, and I'm going to give you guys back about 30 minutes. And I apologize if you were looking for more. I'm like adding slides last night, and I'm like, I think this is enough. That is me. You can scan that QR code and it'll take you to my LinkedIn profile. You can find us on the web level access, karlgroves.com, and on all of the socials, I'm Karl Groves. So are there any questions?
First, a round of applause, and then the questions. Yes, thank you, Karl. Let's do the question part. So, who has any questions? Oh, yes. Okay, let's start here.
With the rise of augmented and virtual reality using web technologies in 3D, is there any experience, or do you have any experience so far in accessibility in 3D space?
Wow. Yes and no. I don't have a ton of experience with that myself, other than that I did work on a project with a company that they do healthcare training. And they created this really interesting healthcare training that was using Unreal Engine, and it was surprisingly accessible. I could not believe it. Now, a lot of the gaming engines are not as accessible as that one, so I don't have a ton of experience. But I do know that because of that engine, it could expose similar things to built-in stuff that is enabled on the gaming platforms. I also know that there's a lot of other work in that space. There's a guy named Thomas Logan in the United States who has a ton of content, and I would recommend looking him up for that. Yeah.
Great. Yes.
Thank you for presentation. And the question is, do you use some API or tools that help you to make sites like accessible for different people? Do you have some automated stuff, or maybe some libraries, whatever?
You mean for the development or for testing? For development. So what's really great is because there's a lot of additional focus on accessibility these days, a lot of major libraries that are out there already have a lot of accessibility built in. A lot of Angular stuff, default Angular and React stuff is already there. If you're into mobile development, the mobile platform has very similar things to Wayaria. So in terms of what platform I use the web platform. The web is inherently accessible. The standards themselves for building HTML have accessibility built into them. They have all the objects, when they're rendered to the screen, have all the methods and properties available. And for anything that's not built into the native HTML, there's Wayaria for doing that. And a lot of front-end frameworks already implement or support a lot of that stuff. So really, I don't really recommend anything specific because a lot of really great support is out there. All the way back to jQuery 1.9 if anybody here is old enough to remember that.